So we know Ronald Reagan will defeat Carter at the polls. But you have to understand America is getting older, right? That baby boomer generation, they're getting more conservative. And so what we see, our 1960s, we saw younger people being involved. Now they're older by the 1980s. They have moved away from this Rust Belt because what has happened to all of those industrial jobs? They're declining because where are most Americans buying cars from? And so people are moving into this red area, which is called what? The Sun Belt. We're going to see a new right develop. So let's just talk about left and right. So if I were to look at a political spectrum, the left is always the liberal, and the right is always the conservative. So if I were to look at people running today, where would I put Bernie Sanders?
Left wing.
Left wing, he's like falling off, right? Okay. Where would I put Trump?
Right wing.
Okay. Where would I put like Elizabeth Warren? To the left. Is she all the way falling off like Bernie? No, she's over here, right? So do y'all understand liberal and conservative? Okay. So what we're seeing is there's going to be a new right movement. So it's on this side of conservative. Their response to the cultural protests of the 60s. They're saying our government has become more active, but the government has moved away from its Christian values. And the group of people who are going to be a part of this new conservative movement are evangelical Christians. And y'all remember that there was a question on question 6. What are the neoconservative beliefs? A lot of y'all had that blank. Here it is, their neoconservative beliefs. They're against abortion. So what case are they against? Roe versus Wade. They're against pornography that has come out since the 1950s when we got rid of the Comstock Law. They're against homosexuality that has come out in the openly gay Pink Panther movement. They're against feminism because we saw the feminists come out trying to champion what new amendment did they want that never passed? ERA. Right? We also see they're against affirmative action because have a lot of businesses and a lot of universities started to adopt this. And okay, so I've taught about the Great Awakenings. Remember those?
Yeah.
The first Great Awakening. Actually, we've talked about the Puritans. They're our first real Great Awakening, right? So we're reviewing. So remember the Puritans came in 1630? And then we go to less religious times. And then we come back by 1730. And we have the first Great Awakening. And then what happens to religion? It wanes. And then it comes back by 1830. We have the what? And then what happens to religion? It wanes. And 100 years later, what are we in? 1930. Are we going to be as religious? No, because what event is going on? So our third Great Awakening is actually 50 years late. And it's going to happen in the 1980s. And this is going to happen with people who are called our televangelists, the new religious right. So how many of you ever on Sunday morning turn on the TV and you see all of the televangelists coming into your TV, like Joel Osteen? Yes? Okay, back at this time it used to be Billy Graham and Jerry Falwell. But these are the people leading the moral majority. They want our government to have more morals and ethics because have we lost our ethics in our government?
Yeah.
Do we have some defining events that could say that we've lost our ethics? We read about it. What was it? Watergate, and then also Vietnam. And we're going to see that they're asking our conservative right, our moral majority, to become more politically involved. And basically, they're behind two things. The right to life, which goes with Roe versus Wade. And we're seeing another case. Remember I have talked about the case where we took prayer out of schools? And they want prayer to be returned to schools. So I want you to think about Texas. Does Texas get around that case that limits prayer in school? How does Texas get cheeky and allow prayer in schools? Moment of silence. Okay, so the election of Reagan in the 1980s is going to reinforce the conservative right, the moral majority, but he's going to be pro-common man. Because there has been a group of people who have been left out, which is our lower class whites. Because we saw in the 60s Who did the Democratic Party focus on? What groups of people who were marginalized? Minorities. And he's saying that the common man has been left out because our government has been increasing spending, right, on Vietnam. That has caused inflation. And he says our government has gotten too big for us to handle. And the government is now the problem. This is opposite of FDR. FDR said the government was the solution, right? And so what we're seeing is these neoconservative ideas are going to come around. Besides that whole thing being against abortion, pornography, but they want capitalism and individuals and family values restored. And so we're going to see the working class white that used to be a part of the Democratic Party will now move into the Republican Party. So Reagan, when he wins in 1980, a lot of it stems because the Republican Party will run the ABC campaign. Anybody but Carter. Gosh. And Carter will lose the election because of double-digit inflation, the Iranian hostage crisis, and the conservative movement in the nation. And so when Reagan comes to office, Reagan's whole goal is to reduce the debt. He is going to cut the budget by $35 billion. By cutting the budget, he is going to cut programs such as food stamps, Great Society, Medicaid, and Medicare. Okay? Are people going to be upset?
Yes.
Yes. We're going to see he felt that if we created a smaller government, that means that the government won't be taking much from taxpayers, and that money would be in their pockets that they could do what with it? Spend. And this is called supply side economics, which is called Reaganomics. The whole idea that if you cut taxes, what do businesses and consumers have in their pockets? More money. And a business, what they would do is they would put this in savings that the banking industry can loan out, or businesses would reinvest and build extra to their factory, which means they would employ more people. Those people would get new money, right? And then they could go spend, and then our economy would uplift. This is called supply side economics. Cut taxes, deregulate. And we're going to see it's basically what we saw in the 1920s of trickle-down economics. And so, this is our tax rates. What happens to them in the 80s? It goes down. But y'all know that Reagan, is he going to increase funding? What is he going to increase funding? It was this program that y'all had on your interview called Star Wars. What was Star Wars? Not the movie. The Strategic Defense Initiative, right? That was supposed to do what?
Shoot lasers.
Shoot lasers. And so he's cutting the budget here, but what's going to happen?
He's going to invest into the military.
Invest in the military, but do we need more money for it?
Yes.
And so this is what's going to start our debt. Have we been bankrolling debt for a while?
Yeah.
Yes. And have y'all seen our debt clock?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at it. Because this is the point where we realize this is where our debt comes from. Okay, and then we're just going to get all depressed all at the same time. Do y'all see where we are today? A lot of the debt comes because he cuts those taxes. It's compounding interest. Eventually in macro, you're going to get into this compounding interest. Well, you'll take it to like the 18th power. So what we are getting to is we were about like $2 trillion in debt. But then we start funding to Star Wars. And then we start funding to escalate the Cold War. And we are going to get into another war after this, Persian Gulf War, which you had on your interview. Then we get into the global war on terror. And what is happening? Our debt is growing. And it's because of supply-side economics. What did he do to taxes? Cut them. And so can any politician after Reagan say, I'm going to increase your taxes? Would y'all elect someone who says, I'm going to increase your taxes? No. So eventually Papa Bush will come in saying, no new taxes. But what is he going to have to do? Because what's going to happen to our debt clock? It's going to skyrocket. For us to pay this off per citizen, each one of you. So like, Eric, tell me how many people in your family?
5.
Times that. Could your daddy pay the U.S. government this times 5?
No.
No. And this is just to end this debt right here. But will politicians say that we are going to increase your taxes today by this? No, because are you going to elect them?
No.
So now we're facing the problem of deficit spending since Roosevelt. But it's going to get so out of hand in the Reagan administration because of his policy of Reaganomics. So we were at this one. And then I want you to realize, let's look at all our taxes. I know, I'm just making y'all depressed. What happens to them under the rest of his administration? It goes down even further, right? And we're ending the Cold War. And then we get over here to 2000 when we get involved in what? 2000, 2001, what do we get involved in? The global war on terror, right? And do we even increase taxes here to fund that war? No. And so this is why that debt clock gets crazy, and which we're going to finish out in a second. But a lot of it stems from, should we back? He's depressed now? Oh gosh. I told you. I told you that debt cloud. I'm going to show it once to you, never show it to you again. Okay? But never get credit cards because that's what compounding interest does. It keeps on ticking, ticking, ticking. And you'll look at that next year in macroeconomics when you'll calculate it. So you're basically compounding that interest and it's hard to pay back. Okay? I just made you all depressed, never want to get a credit card. Okay, so deregulation is going to occur. Okay, I kind of led up to how Afghanistan led to the global war on terror. I need to talk about another policy that led to the global war on terror, which was deregulation. One of the places we deregulate is the airlines industry. So let me talk to you about what it was for me to be a kid in the 80s. That meant when my dad went on his trips, I could go all the way up to the airplane. I could go in the airplane with my dad, kiss him goodbye, and get off the airplane and go home with my mom. Can you do that today? No. We had the deregulation of the airline industry at that time. A lot of things that they were looking at for maintenance of the machines didn't go on. Okay? There was open movement in the airport. People used to go to the airport and treat it like a mall because it's duty free. You could often buy a lot of stuff there without the tax. And so we deregulate the airlines industry. Oops, because what do we know by doing that, having less rules on it? What is that going to lead to? 9/11. Like my uncle who lived in Washington, he often flew for the Air Force. He would often get, his planes had got hijacked 3 times. Of those 3 times, he wound up in Cuba 3 times. And Fidel Castro did not want to have an American plane. So he would often go on the plane, well, get someone of his government, go on the plane, they would give them cigars, and they would return the plane. But there was people within America who were trying to advance the communist cause. Did the U.S. do anything at that time to stop hijackings?
No.
The other thing that happened is the savings and loan industry. Most saving and loans industries are not part of the FDIC. Do y'all remember the FDIC?
Yes.
Yes. Is your bank, did y'all go check if your banks were FDIC insured? No?
Yes.
Gosh, oh my gosh. Why do you want your banks to be FDIC insured?
So you don't lose
So you don't lose your money. These savings and loans, banks at this time were not FDIC insured. Is that bad?
Yes.
And they're going to make some risky loans at this time and they will go bankrupt. What's going to happen to the people's money in there? They're going to lose it. And this will eventually lead to the CDIC being created that will cover credit unions and savings and loan places. So today, like if you are part of, what's a small bank? Prosperity Bank? Is there a Prosperity Bank here? I think somewhere. It's CDIC. If you're in CNB, are most of y'all CNB?
I'm Wells Fargo.
Okay. Wells Fargo is FDIC. The last thing is they're going to remove oil controls. And so Texas at this time is going to become one of the biggest oil producing states because we moved those price controls and also regulation. And this is when the Bushes come to Texas. Okay? And they're going to create, in the oil industry in Abilene, we're going to see Papa Bushes come down here, and then we're going to see Baby Bush go to Houston. And they're going to actually, they have been coming in the 60s, but they're going to make it big at this time. And then, have you ever heard of that show called Dallas?
Yeah.
And the reason why they focus on Dallas, because Texas at this time was where the millionaires were because of the oil industry. Okay, I had showed you this about our debt. Our debt from the 40s, from World War II all the way up to the 80s was around $2 trillion. Not bad. But then what do we do with taxes under the Reagan administration? And then look what happens to our debt. And then I kind of dovetailed into like 2000 and then all of the other deficit spending because of the global war on terror. That's how we're at 22 trillion. Okay, so the reducing of these taxes is going to cause this huge deficit, and it's also going to cause our huge debt. And we're going to see that we're going to have a growing gap between the rich and the poor, and if this is just going to make you more depressed, because I just made it bigger, but I think I made you depressed even more when I showed you those numbers and how they kept on ticking. So we're just going to move on. Y'all saw this on your interview. This was a POCL, because had there ever been a woman on the Supreme Court? No. And Sandra Day O'Connor is going to be one of those glass ceilings that's broken. And you have to understand how hard it is for a woman to be a lawyer at this time. Law schools will accept women. But do you think most businesses would hire women? So we're going to see, y'all know Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? And Sandra Day O'Connor, they don't get hired on by businesses, but they become clerks. And a clerk, what that means is you're a lawyer for the courts. And that's how they get into politics. And by appointing her, Sandra Day O'Connor, this is what it's going to lead to businesses to start turning to hiring women. Eventually, we will see the academic realm hire women to be professors, but not private business hiring them to be lawyers. Reagan will also appoint some other conservatives, such as Rehnquist, to the Supreme Court. So in '84, he's going to win in a landslide. But the reason why we have to talk about the '84 election, and I know it was on your study guide, is because who the Democrats are running. They're running the first female vice president, Geraldine Ferraro. And that's seen as a POCL because we had never seen a woman vice president. We have seen a woman run for the presidency, Victoria Woodhull. And many people thought that the Democrats would win, but do they? Okay. So we're done with all the domestic. What we're going to look at is the foreign. And a lot of you know Reagan's most infamous quote. What is his most infamous quote about? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the way he de-escalates the Cold War by getting the Berlin Wall down is he's actually going to escalate it again. We've been seeing the de-escalation with Nixon and détente. But what he's going to do is re-escalate the war, and we talked about this when we were going over our debt. The creation of Star Wars. He wanted to focus on being able to nuke the intercontinental ballistic missiles of the Soviet Union. So he creates the Strategic Defense Initiative, which is using these lasers that are supposed to be able to nuke the intercontinental ballistic missiles. Is the technology there? No. We are going to realize the only thing a laser does well is entertain a cat. Right? Have you ever tried that with your cats? No? You just get entertained by the laser Joshua hates? No? Okay. Our next issue with the Cold War, beyond Star Wars, deals with Poland. And there's going to be this movement called Solidarity, that it's a labor union. They're actually trying to throw off the Soviet Union. And they want more freedoms for their workers. And the Polish government realized that this is a threat. They will declare martial law and squash the Solidarity movement. And so the U.S. will post sanctions because it's not being humanitarian. At the same time, and we kind of see this today about airline passengers, planes being shot down. But our first one is actually going over the Soviet Union, the Korean air passenger plane, and it's shot down. And this is going to send our world into disarray, and that they're violating airspace. And so this is going to lead to the Soviets boycotting the U.S. Olympics. And we will eventually boycott theirs. So our next issue deals with Lebanon. The U.S. has started putting forces in Beirut as a peacekeeping organization to maintain the peace in the Middle East. And what we're going to see is, y'all, I don't know if y'all know today, how many of y'all today have been to a military base? And y'all know that they're very well guarded today. And a lot of that stemmed from September 11th, but back at this time, people could freely get in and out of military bases. And military bases have very cool things. Like if you go to the ones in San Antonio, you can see all the Air Force, old planes, from World War I all the way to the present on display. And so people would go into these military barracks. And in foreign countries, it was very easy to get into a barracks. And there is going to be a suicide bomber. And he is going to be able to come into the barracks and he crashes. And he has stuff in his car and he kills 241 Marines that were asleep in their barracks. And Reagan's going to get on TV. And he's going to get a nickname called Teflon. I don't know if y'all know what Teflon is. How many of you ever... Teflon is on pans. So do y'all know why Teflon's on pans?
So it doesn't stick.
So it doesn't stick. He's going to give an apology. He's saying these men have gotten their last full measure of breath to protect not only Americans, but people of other nations. These guys were so noble. Do you think this is going to stick to him, this event? No, it doesn't. He is nicknamed the Teflon president because when anything bad happens in his administration, doesn't get any of the blame. No, they're going to look at the suicide bomber. The next big event that actually should have caused him problems, which y'all had on your study guide, was the Iran-Contra scandal. And we're seeing there's issues in Nicaragua that communists, the Sandinistas, are trying to take power. And the U.S. wants to support the rebels. But our government has said that we cannot go in and support the rebels. And so Reagan proposes that we prop up governments in Latin America that are pro-U.S. The U.S. will also capture pro-Marxist areas such as Grenada. I don't know if y'all know why Grenada is important, but Grenada, like, do you know if people don't get into medical school in the United States, that they could go overseas to a medical school and get their doctorate and come back and practice within the United States? Grenada has a medical school that's there, and the communists are threatening to take over when we have American students at these medical schools, and so that's why the U.S. goes into Grenada. Eventually, Reagan will adopt his own doctrine saying we will not tolerate communism in the third world. This will then thus take us into the Iran-Contra affair because we know we have problems in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas rising up. But the U.S. cannot give aid to the Contra rebels. So the U.S. is going to come in through the back door. What is going to happen is the U.S. is going to start selling weapons to Iran. And Iran will then filter that money back to the U.S., but it's going to be sent to the Contras. Is that illegal? And this whole scandal is revealed. Should it tarnish Reagan's administration? But again, what's his nickname? Teflon. It will not stick to him. We're going to see North Poindexter and Weinberger will all take the fall. And they will admit the president did not know much. And this will eventually lead to the Gorbachev-Reagan discussions. And Gorbachev's realizing that the Soviet Union is falling so far behind on consumer items that the Cold War that heated up is actually hurting their economy. And he's going to introduce two new ideas, glasnost, which means openness, and perestroika, which means to be restructured. And he wants to restructure the Soviet Union so that the people of the Soviet Union have a good life. And these negotiations will lead to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty that reduces nuclear weapons. And it's these ideas of glasnost and perestroika that eventually will lead to the fall of the Soviet Union, because people can openly and freely talk. People get returning of businesses to them. The other things that face Reagan's administration is that we have the dubious Iran-Contra scandal, where we filtered money to weapons to Iran and money to the Contras. We're going to have trade and budget deficits. We have the bank institution failure. And then y'all saw the stock market crash. It's going to be on the back of your study guide. There's some successes in administration. We're going to see it does end the Cold War. We're going to see the quality of our military get better. But the last thing that should have tarnished his administration was the Challenger explosion. But he's going to take the Challenger explosion, and we'll watch it in a second. And he's going to talk about these astronauts. And you have to understand, most Americans this morning are watching it because there's a teacher on board, Christina McAuliffe. And all the school children are there watching it because this is the first time a teacher is going to go out into space. So they're all just there watching. And we're going to watch it in a second. But after the event, he goes on TV and he talks about the valor of these people going into the unknown. And he's going to say they slipped surely from the bonds of the earth to touch the face of God. And they're now in heaven. Their act of valor will always be remembered, and we must continue the sciences. And people are like, yes, Reagan, that is true. But he takes a negative event and he spins it. All right, we're going to watch it in a second. He does get an assassination attempt. His security detail, the guy in front of him will take the bullet, and this will eventually lead to the Bundy gun law, that it was someone who was criminally deranged and that they need to have some testing before people and some wait period before people get guns. And they asked Reagan, they're like, you saw that guy point blank, why didn't you move? And he was like, I forgot to duck. And so many people he's always comical about stuff, but there was an assassination attempt on his life. So